Slipknot,
Napalm Death,
Hatebreed,
System of a Down,
Rob Halford,
Pantera, Cannibal Corpse.
I did not know that humans could do such a thing, but I knew immediately that I wanted to try to figure out how to do it.
First exposure to like hardcore and screaming that I had was a band called Shai Hulud. Feel the quarrel with justice presence! Because they're the first ones that I heard that was like full-blown screaming. I think I was a sophomore in high school. And that was kind of like the explosion of screaming music and extreme music all together, with AFI, Shai Hulud, stuff like that being the first batch of bands that came in with that.
The first time I ever heard screamed vocals was a band called Intent to Injure. They're out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, hardcore band. And the guy's voice was, I didn't understand what was happening. It was next level. And I just did my best to try to emulate that over and over again in a lot of pain, trying to figure out how to do it. I was 14 going on 15 when I first heard like that type of a voice. It was that and also death metal, hearing Napalm Death as well. So the death growls and then the hardcore screams were the two things that really blew my mind.
When did you decide that you wanted to start singing in a metal style and to start singing gutturals? Like, what influenced you to do that?
Well, Napalm Death. You know, like I grew up with the new wave, British heavy metal, that kind of stuff, and it was like a evolution of sorts. You wanted heavier, faster, more extreme, and of course you had the speed and thrash metal scene, and along comes the black metal scene, and then the death metal scene. And at that point, when I got into death metal, I was 14, 15 years old, and I was just learning, you know, a few licks on the guitar, and I figured I could do that. I could do, you know, You Suffer by Napalm Death, 2-second song, you know, just you didn't necessarily have to be on the right fret, you know, just make noise, you know. That's how it started.
For me, it was like, I'll be really honest, it was listening to Hatebreed. Hatebreed were the band that inspired me to do what I do, because at that point in time I couldn't sing, I couldn't be in a punk rock band, and heavy bands started really attracting me.
I guess I was 5, and when Ace Ventura: Pet Detective came out, I was like, okay, that makes sense. This Ace Ventura loves animals, this whole movie is about animals, and so I just was like, okay, they're just an animal band, and that's why he likes them so much, because they sound like animals. And I guess other than that memory of being a little kid, my gateway, you know, I heard System of a Down. I remember I saw Chop Suey on MTV2 when I was home from school one day, when I guess I was in 6th grade or 7th grade, and there were some aggressive kind of screaming vocals in that.
Wake up! Wake up! Run, rush, and put a little makeup!
At that point in my life, I was like, oh, I see all the weird kids at school wearing these shirts that say like Linkin Park, and System of a Down, and, you know, Korn and Slipknot. It was more like the fashion of it, because I had never been exposed to the music until a couple of years later. So what I'm trying to say is I'm a giant poser.
Ooh, what was the first extreme vocals I've ever heard in my life? It might have to have been something on the radio, like super old Fall Out Boy or something, when they had heavier vocals. It could have been something like that. But I want to think back, maybe like Suicide Silence. Maybe. I think that might be it, yeah. I did not know that humans could do such a thing, but I knew immediately that I wanted to try to figure out how to do it. Oh, I tried to sound like Matty Way from Abominable Putridity. that was the slam band for me. I was like, I want to sound like that. Everything I want to do, I want to do that. Slam heads will argue that that is not the best album, but Anomalies of Artificial Origin is the best Abominable Putridity album. For highs, Mitch Lucker. I wanted to sound like that. That was the goal. At Matty Way lows, Mitch Lucker highs.
I think I was like 18, like when I heard Growling for the first time. It was the singer of the band Scum, who I would later actually join. So they were playing a show, and me and some other friends from class went to see his show. That's the first time I saw like death metal, or heard death metal actually. Through that, I started to listen to more death metal, and one of the first death metal albums I actually did buy, since you mentioned it, was Dismember, Like an Ever-Flowing Stream.
I remember I was 15 or 16, and I first heard OTEP band. Like my friend showed me their music and stuff, and I was like, "Oh my god! Well, I like this dude's attitude, you know." And my friend just was like, "No, Daddy, it's a girl." I was like, "Shit! Are you seriously? Are you serious?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's what I want to do."
Who made me want to sing? I think it would be Jim Morrison. I remember when I was a kid. Like, my uncle gave me a stack of records, and he said, "Give me back the ones you don't like." And I kept The Doors, Hendrix, Sabbath, and and I gave him back the Grateful Dead, Yes, and a bunch of other prog rock shit that I didn't like, that I just didn't like, you know? So Morrison was like the first one, but then I also, Ozzy had that distinct, but it was real high. I liked Morrison because he had that bluesy, like, lower thing going on.
No one remembers your name when you're straying.
And I just liked his lyrics. I thought his lyrics are great. So that was like my first kind of introduction to it.
My kid brother turned me on to a lot of metal, right? Mm-hmm. Or he was attempting to, right? Yeah. So I always listened to punk rock, and he turned me on to some stuff that I really liked, like Bolt Thrower, Obituary, you know, really like those two bands, really important to me.
When I first got into metal, the first band I ever heard was Metallica. It was Metallica, Megadeth, Testament, Pantera, Slayer. I remember it was when getting into Pantera, starting to get an introduction to extreme metal vocals, like when Phil started getting a little bit more extreme and Far Beyond Driven, especially on Great Southern Trendkill. I got into death metal, black metal, melodic death metal. From there, I started hearing more and more distortion as I thought it was on the voices, and it kept getting more and more extreme. But hearing early on, like the first death metal band I ever heard was Cannibal Corpse, and I heard Corpse Grinder stuff first. Danny Filth off Dusk in Her Embrace. It was Corpse Grinder on Bloodthirst. In Flames, Jotun was the first melodic death metal song I ever heard. I remember being pretty intrigued by Bodom as well, because I was like, this is particularly unique. So that was the introduction to extreme metal vocals. The vocals of melodic death metal is really what changed it up for me, and I feel like that's what I started emulating a bit. My path was metal bands first, and then getting an introduction to black metal and death metal, melodic death metal. Those two components, extreme metal plus metal, sort of carved out what Trivium was, and then when I got into metalcore, through actually the German metalcore scene, Caliban and Heaven Shall Burn, that's when I started seeing this other approach to vocals. And it was, I believe my screaming was more of an approach of someone who was into extreme metal, who was emulating what they heard in hardcore metalcore. And I feel like that's what my screaming was. As Jason Sukoff so lovingly describes it, high without being annoying. So my screaming doesn't sound high, but if you listen to it, there is a higher pitch to it off that normal scream.
I don't remember how old I was, but some of the first like screamy vocals I heard was in BMX DVDs because I rode BMX growing up. It was actually a VHS. It wasn't even a DVD, but I heard Phoenix Ignition by Thrice. And if I recall correctly, that was the first time I heard screamy in music.
When I heard, Carcass and Cannibal Corpse, Chris Barnes. Symphonies of Sickness was the most, out of anybody or anything, that was the most influential to me.
I think it was Kronos who really made me want to scream. And he was a screamer, but like he was a vocalist, but also it's like a combination of scream and singing, because his screaming technique kind of include the melody in it as well.
I remember making friends with this kid, and he burned me Metallica's Ride the Lightning CD. And obviously, never have I heard anything like the deeper cuts, like the more, the heavier stuff. I think it was Trapped Under Ice on Metallica's Ride the Lightning, and going, holy shit. Just mind blown that, someone could make these sounds, and then past that, moving into like Slipknot and System of a Down and Mudvayne and such, Beneath the Massacre and Carnifex and who else was there? As Blood Runs Black, getting into more and more extreme vocals and hearing like all these just like guttural pig squeals and the Breeze back in 2006 and 2007, going, how in the fucking world are they doing this?
So I would say the band that introduced me to heavy vocals was Avenged Sevenfold with their album Waking the Fallen. And I actually heard Chapter 4 for the first time off of, I believe it was Madden 2003. But that, I mean, throughout the years, I think 02 through like 06, Madden had like Under Oath, Thrice, Brand New, Avenged Sevenfold, Atreyu. Like, that's what got me into metalcore and got me into screaming.
Well, the singer that probably inspired me most growing up, that really was the pivotal next step, was probably Rob Halford. I'm sure that was a lot of singers in the late 70s, early 80s who fired up a lot of people that eventually went on to have careers themselves. But I mean, Halford, we all know his screaming ability and the things he can do. But he was in the early stages of Judas Priest, he also was very bluesy. He kind of at times sounded a little bit like Robert Plant.
We would see our minds were free.
At times, like you could tell that he was extremely diverse in all the things he could do, and then his power, his conviction, of course the lyrics. It was just all. There's no way to listen to like those certain Priest records in the late 70s, early 80s that just kind of were so captivating, and him as a singer, that just took it to another level. So that was like the first singer. I mean, of course, everybody loved Ronnie as well. I mean, Ronnie's solo work was great, of course, but I'm like a really huge Rainbow fan, and certainly the first couple Sabbath records that he made are just, Heaven and Hell is legendary. So, and then of course Dickinson, is another one of those guys that deserves all the accolades, because not only is he still singing great, but his stage persona is just so incredible. Like, the guy is everywhere, and I'm like, man, and for like two and a half hours, and he's really, really fit. I know he's a little bit older than me, and I know what it takes to put out on stage. And so, he's really incredible. So those guys they're probably like the three kings of heavy metal singing.
Okay, the first time I ever heard extreme vocal was actually when I was, I want to say 10 or 11. And my mom came in my room, and she's like, I heard this band on the radio, and I feel like you would like them. And it was actually Stupefied by Disturbed. And I was like, whoa. That's really cool. And then I met a friend later in my teenage years that introduced me to Census Fail, and I Did Remember, and I was like pretty much hooked after that. It's a deep rabbit hole to go down.
So for me, trying to get into doing extreme vocals for the first time didn't seem like something that I was intentionally like, oh, I'm gonna try to pay rent off this. It was because I wanted to be in a band, but I had no musical skills. So all you can do is sing, and if you don't know how to sing, then all you can do is yell. So just by process of elimination, you end up yelling when you're jamming with your band, or your family, your friends, whatever. You end up just yelling because that's all you can do. And then, I think a big part of learning how to scream is like writing. You end up writing lyrics, and then you want to yell them, and you don't play an instrument, so you're the one that's writing the lyrics. So it developed from there. It wasn't really an intentional move. I just happened to write, and I also happened to not be able to play an instrument, so I ended up just yelling.